Guys, thanks ever so much for joining today. I'm super excited to have my guest with us today, Sadiar. Sadiar, for those in the audience that don't know you, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, Suki. Hello, everybody. My name is Sadiar, and I mean, in terms of introduction, I want to keep it in terms of our context today. So, I head up the search practice for Canada for Adecco, and I work with a fantastic team of directors that are subject matter experts in a variety of disciplines nationwide. And we solely focus on direct hire permanent recruitment. And I know I lost all the temp recruiters right now, but I just thought I'd point that out from the beginning.
Perfect. And let's just dive straight in because I am mindful that this is people's lunch hour and then what have you. But I I want to start off with my first question. You decided to leave a position, a really great position with a great, well-known company around the world in the midst of a pandemic to join Adecco. And arguably, just on your point there, Adecco is known around the world. When you think of Adecco, you think general staffing. So can you talk me through that decision and what was a catalyst for you taking the risk to launch this practice, of course, in the midst of a pandemic as well?
Sure. I mean, it definitely wasn't an easy decision, but in terms of the catalyst, I can really, pinpoint four different main areas that, went into my decision making. One, Adecco as a brand, where, it's the leader in the global staffing industry, either number one spot or number two spot every year, and definitely an attractive brand. So that was the first thing. Second thing was that the company is people focused. The company it's evident that through the candid conversations I've had with leadership at Adecco that it's a people focused organizations. In terms of programs that Adecco runs, for example, Win for Youth, CEO for 1 month, and the true culture of DE&I and giving back has been very evident from the get-go, which made my decision sort of easy on the culture and the leadership front. But in terms of other areas that I was interested in is that it gives individuals the ability to truly flex their entrepreneurship muscles, and being such a massive organization, it was something that was very refreshing to see. And the last, I guess, reason was more on the D&I initiatives that we have currently on the go. Working in organized work streams to really address some of the topics in an array of problems that we face day-to-day basis as leaders around D&I was very evident. And I think you may have something to do with my decision making as well. So on top of everything.
um, yeah, because I remember during the process, because you've heard me say often when we're looking for a job, we're either running away from something or we're running towards something. You certainly weren't running away from anything. You had you're in a good place, but and then you decided to make that move. It was the pandemic, and yes, there's everything. I agree with everything you said. Janelle has been in Canada, what, 18 months now. She's done a
Correct.
phenomenal job. And just a plug here, if anybody hasn't seen the live that I'd done with Janelle, definitely go back and look at that. But what are some of the thoughts that were going through your mind? Because if I remember correctly, we're coming up to a year now.
Correct.
Right? A year.
June 14th, actually, 1
There you
year.
go.
Yeah.
Literally just over, right? So, and that was a height of the pandemic. So I'd love for you to just talk a little bit more about how it felt from a candidate perspective, because depending on where you are in the world, we've all had those candidates that are staying where they are because they're scared to make a move because there's so much unknown. What was your experience and what advice would you have for those candidates?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's certainly not an easy decision. I'm not going to sit here and say that it was very clear and, very straight to the point. But again, some of the values that you want to have in your search have to be very clear, in terms of what you want ultimately in your career, what you want ultimately in your role, the type of environment you thrive in. I guess it's more of an inward thinking as opposed to looking at the opportunity at hand and seeing if that opportunity that presents itself aligns with things that you have been thinking about or aligned with internally. So there is no good or bad time for making a move, right? There's really, pandemic, no pandemic, it's about, if that opportunity aligns with what you have, I would say jump both feet in. It's a great, it was a great opportunity can present itself at times that may not necessarily be obvious, and also at times that are, everyone is making a move, like the great reshuffle or reevaluation or resignation, as we call it. So to answer your question, I think that the thoughts that went through my mind were, how do I stay level-headed and logical about this move, as much as, it is an exciting opportunity, and I see everyone around me considering opportunities, and not necessarily at my past employer, but in the industry in general. And I think all of those led me to looking at it, if it wasn't pandemic, would I make this move, right? And that was the moment I realized that yes, that would be the case, because of the other reasons that have nothing to do with, for example, compensation, or the mandates and things like that, that are just making it the right ecosystem for me to thrive in.
You said something really interesting there, and I think not only can the audience, for their own perspective, but also from the candidate's perspective, you asked yourself, pandemic, no pandemic, what decision would I make? So it's almost like, and I don't want to make it sound as if you were dismissive of the pandemic, but you didn't allow it to be at the forefront, didn't allow it to guide every single decision that you made. Because yes, some are parts of the world, because we do have an international audience here, the pandemic's in a rearview mirror, other countries not so much. And the truth of the matter is, replace pandemic with whatever's coming next, because there's always something coming next. So what advice would you give? And I just quickly want the same ask you the same question from a different perspective. What advice would you give to those recruiters that are watching now and listening now, and they've got candidates that maybe are fearful because now we're talking about a recession looming, and things like that? So what advice would you give to those individuals watching who may potentially have senior candidates such as yourself who are hesitant to make a move because it's a fear of the unknown?
That's a great topic, Suki, and something that we face in our teams with candidates and clients that we work with as well. And I always go back to how well do you know your candidate, right? Because if you know your candidate well, regardless of the situation or what's happening in the world, a career move may be something that makes sense or it doesn't make sense. It's very black and white in that regard. Sometimes it's more complicated to get that clarity from the candidate. So my advice would be to spend more time learning about the candidate, learning about what's important to them, learning about their values, what is their typical pushes and pulls that they have in the current market, but not influencing their decision, but sitting next to them and consulting them on the right decision based on the information you gather together. As we all know, hiring is a informative decision, right? So as much information as you have, the better decision you're able to make. So sharing as much information about the opportunity with the candidate for them to see the pros and cons, and learning as much as possible from the candidates, as you can. Sometimes it's a matter of spending a longer amount of time with the candidate that's in play, right, before an offer is made or after his offer is made, to really consult and learn about what is the factor that they're looking for, right? And sometimes it's cutting the noise, right, and giving them clarity, and looking at things like the pandemic and what's happening in the world. Although we want to be extremely empathetic and understanding of what's happening, but also giving candidates a clarity that all things aside, is this the right move for you, right? where would you be 5, 10 years from now if you make this decision? The other to that decision-making process that we have to consider, and this is something we talk internally quite a bit about, is 2 decisions down, right? So you make this move, and what would be your next move, right? If your next move after that also makes sense, right, then it's probably a right decision to make. And teaching candidates to think like that, and not just about the immediate opportunity that's in front of them, but what other opportunities can come up because of the opportunities that they have accepted that's in front of them at that moment.
I love that, because a lot of, you hear all the time, okay, so what's your career aspirations? Where do you want to be? But what you've done there is you've really narrowed it down. And instead of saying next 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, you're like, okay, now what exactly is that next move after this? I think there's also a part here in recruiting where we tend to, and as a generalizing sweeping statement, I know, because of the way the metrics work, everybody's so focusing on closing that deal this quarter that they don't focus on the process. So what I'm hearing from you is focus on that process. If it is the right move for the candidate and company, that placement's going to happen regardless.
Absolutely, it's all about process, Suki. I think the more focused we are on doing the right thing at every step of the way, and not merely, gone are the days of, you find a resume and you submit, and fingers crossed, and see how it goes. You have to really be involved in every single step of the way, and staying close to your candidates as much as possible. In a virtual world, I would say it's probably easier to do that as opposed to in person.
Yep.
We have text messaging, we have emails, we have social media. Staying close to your candidates, right? I think that is the single most important thing. And part of that, if you want to make it into an operation, it's a process, right? And understanding your cycle of a deal. How has that changed over the last 2 years? Which part of the process are we spending more of our time in? And kind of breaking down that step into sub steps and seeing what it is exactly we need to do in these sub steps to ensure a mid to long term fit for our clients.
Yeah, I think it also goes back down to, you have to understand your candidates' true motivators. And again, that's process, and we could spend all day talking about that, right? But one of the things I think is fundamental is, what is the candidate's true motivators? And just to kind of close the loop on that one, what I see often is people say they're looking to move because they want more money. Well, money is rarely the number one motivator. It's absolutely probably top two, top three for most people, but they just focus on, okay, well, if I get you the money, that, as the assumption, I get you the money, the person's automatically going to move. No, unless that, as I said, it's rarely the number one motor. It's the number one motivator, number two motivator that really is going to make the difference between a candidate making the move and staying. Right? There's one thing making the move, there's another thing turning up, and then there's the long term staying with that actual company. So let me just move on to the next question.
Sure.
So you've been there a year now. You've successfully built out the search practice across multiple sectors. What's been some of the biggest challenges you've experienced, and how did you manage to navigate your way through those?
Great question. Suki, there's a saying, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it, right? And I live and breathe that every single day. So if you think about it, navigating challenges of all kinds, it depends on your attitude and perception towards the challenge. For example, some challenges we faced here are the same challenges our clients are facing or other people in the industry, which is, talent shortage, while trying to expand and grow, right, in a very competitive market. And also navigating a diverse workforce that is all over the country and predominantly remote, right? So two main challenges. Now, all of these challenges, we go through them just like everyone else. So that's the first mindset we have to be in. We are not alone in these challenges. So there are resources out there there are, best practices out there that, we have to educate ourselves on. And I think, in terms of decision making, really breaking down each challenge into micro challenges that you go through every single day, right? And as opposed on the opposite side of a challenge is a decision, right? So as you're going through the challenges, you have small decisions to make every single day towards overcoming these challenges. So as long as you have the right guiding principle to those decision making, so it's essentially a logical decision one after another, and by the end of the day or by the end of the week or the month, some of all your decisions and efforts help you overcome those challenges, is the way I think about all these challenges. Is, how do we break it down to daily and weekly challenges we face? What does that mean to people? How does it impact people? Again, being a people-focused company, that is the first question and on the top of mind. And how do we communicate? How do we overcome? And how do we, sometimes pause and take a look at what everyone else is doing and learning from best practices in the industry. And sometimes, to be honest with you, it's not exactly within the staffing industry that we find the answers. It's looking abroad, professional services, or even other industries that face similar challenges, but are really good at solving them. I think it's the thinking process that we have implemented, and the culture that we collaborate. For example, within our team of directors, whenever we have an issue or a problem, we all talk about it as a group, right? And there is no one person's decision or thought that is better than the other. And really teaching that same school of thought, the same, I guess, decision-making process to everybody as much as possible.
Yeah, because what happens is and I'm just as guilty as the next person. You get caught in a situation like we had something go wrong this morning on a launch that was happening today, and we had to delay it for 2 days. Um, and it was either fight it, but there's nothing I could do about it, right? But when I collectively spoke with individuals concerned, we found a solution, right? We found a way forward. And I think often what happens in our industry, we don't talk enough even internally. We talk and we all sympathize, and I get that. We have to sympathize and empathize and what have you. But we don't just look at it objectively and say, okay, I'm on the outside, this is what I am seeing. And if I've understood you correctly, that's something that you have fostered in your team. So, and it's, deliver it, I guess, delivered in a compassionate manner. But sometimes the person that's not involved or is at arm's length is the one with the solution, because that
Right.
emotion isn't involved or isn't as highly as involved to the same depth and breadth. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, just on the practicality of that, I would be, not representing correctly if I say, everyone has time to, reach out and, see exactly what everyone else is doing. But, a practical advice on that would be just looking at the decision making, right? You see a company making a decision and looking at how they got there, and looking at why they've made that decision and looking the impacts of that decision, right? We can learn a lot just by reading, what's going on in different industries. And I think if we set aside time to do that, it's a huge learning experience, at least for me, for the past year, where I've learned a lot of best practices from different industries, but not necessarily spent the time to network with someone from that industry, because that to me, would be better. But from a time perspective, it's not as practical as digesting the news and the information that's out there from reputable sources, of course.
Yeah. So I think what I would just quickly add to that is there's also the learning part, right? So books, reading, and then taking that away and adapting the piece for your industry, and beg your pardon, for your role, and embracing the learning from there. So one of the things I would also add to that is read more. I know that sounds really simple, but there's some amazing content out there from other thought leaders outside of our industry. And there's certain one thing that's common in every industry is the people aspect of it. right? That doesn't change. People have free will. So it's not just our industry, it's learning from others, as you said. I think I'm getting a bit of a delay on my end. Is anyone else experiencing it?
I think I don't see it on my end, Suki.
Okay, perfect. So it must just be at my end. So I
It
apologize.
works fine, Suki.
Okay, perfect. So it's just the way the screen's for me. Okay, perfect. So let's move on. You deal with management and executive level candidates, right? So you're doing mid, senior, executive candidates. The Great Resignation. Everyone's talking about it. How has this impacted your clients' ability to hire and retain staff? Now, we often see, oh, executives are being paid the big bucks. Those problems aren't happening there. They get, so there's a tendency to think that this great resignation is not happening at mid to senior executive level. What are you seeing in your area?
So I think you're spot on that, the challenges are, regardless of the level of candidate that we're dealing with or level of client that we're dealing with. Retention is a problem across the board, from a junior level position to the most senior level position. In terms of retention, what we can do is share information, what we're seeing in the public, with our clients. So the first thing is, educating our clients on, things such as compensation. That is, you need to address that. You need to come prepared, with a compelling offer. And, from a retention standpoint, you need to review, your compensation that you currently have, because what was relevant in 2019 is no longer relevant in 2022. The second thing is flexibility, right? In terms of educating them on a flexible, not just from a hybrid or work a location environment, but also from a scheduling environment, or from being open to kind of having arrangements with folks in order to retain them. And the third is development, both from a career development, but also from a training and development, right? So, what are you doing in terms of, making sure that you upskill and reskill your current staff, regardless of the level they're in. And in terms of career development, do you have a roadmap in terms of where individuals can be short-term and long-term, and what is your current workforce look like? So that's on retention. The second the second one kind of is a elephant in the room sometimes with clients, but making them aware of public information that is out there about their company. I think one of the barriers to candidate attraction is not from the time that candidate applies to a job, but afterwards, when they get an interview with a client and they start researching more about the client, and they see websites and reviews and other information about the company, which sometimes they are aware of, but not the details of it, right? So just bring into forefront something that's public information, and not to hide it or change it, but rather be prepared to respond to it in an interview setting with all levels of candidates. And for more senior level positions, we want to really make them understand that we're just an extension of their company in the market, right? We are not another part. We are it's what we call partnering with them on the search. So if we are successful, that's because they also have sold the opportunity with us in every step of the way. So basically, help us help you, right? They have to sell the opportunity and treat us as an extension of their talent acquisition efforts in the market. And the last thing is just around getting involved in the process, right? Sometimes it's it's not a matter of hiring someone new, it's a matter of retaining the team. And what does that process look like? Do you have a strategy around retention? And is it just, as soon as you get an offer, do you try to counter that? And that is the retention strategy, right? So having a very candid conversation with them, because their success is our success, right? And I believe if we place people that in an environment that, they have retention strategies, they have, great compensation, flexibility, and development, we really are setting our candidates up for success. So the more conversations we have, the better, we are able to equip our clients. But those would be the main things that are top of mind. I can elaborate if you'd like.
Yeah, because one of the things that I was thinking as you were talking about the brand, right? So if there is something out in the public domain about a company and being honest with them, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that is the case out there. There's a lot of companies, whether it's true or not, whether it's deserved or not, where they do have something out there in the public domain that is not necessarily well, it is a barrier to candidates moving forward, because that's a difficult conversation to have. Because I love change management, I have no issues with that having that conversation with a company. But for those individuals that have not actually had that conversation and they want to have that conversation, any tips, advice on how they can do that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, acting as a consultant, not just a recruiter from the get-go, right? This is something we talk about in our teams all the time, is that your initial interaction, that first touch point with your client, how are they viewing you, right? Are they viewing you as a recruiter? Are they viewing you as just somebody that they know, right? That's going to help them? Are they seeing you as a sourcer, right? That is going to source resumes for them? Or are they seeing you as a consultant or as a partner in the search? Regardless if it's a contingent or a retained search, I think the way you carry yourselves in that conversation, could dictate how much questions you can ask and how you can ask those questions, right? Now, some of that does come with experience, right? With the level of practice that you have to do in order to learn that, and shadowing people more senior to you can really help with that. But a part of that is also on you, right? To be curious about these sort of things, right? And not positioning negative news as that's your take, but sharing facts and numbers and data and information that is publicly out there. For example, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this is what I'm seeing on this website, right? Not it's how are you addressing that, right? And if that comes up, what is your argument, right? And having those conversations, they can appreciate that you've done that sometimes, and if they don't, right, they at least think about it, which is, I think, a great thing to do. And in my experience, great companies are prepared to talk about that and are very open to talking about that, and and they have great explanation for why that is, which, if it convinces me or the consultant that is engaged with a client, it should probably convince the candidate that interviews with them as well. What we try to do is just share the facts and the information, right? We're the messenger. So the mentality of a consultant is important, and not adding your 2 cents and just merely being a messenger is also important, I think.
Yeah, because one of the things I teach in the coaching groups is, if before you jump onto any call, you've done your research. And if you haven't, you should do that before jumping onto any kind of cold client call. But also setting that as part of that initial, hey, Mr. Client, this is how this process is going to work. And we need a strategy on how we're going to handle X. Because if, like everything else, if it's set up it correctly in the onboarding call, the client's expecting it. And I think the mistake a lot of recruiters make is they know it's there, they don't really talk about it. And then when the client is saying, well, where's my people? They say, oh, this is why we can't get you people. So it almost sounds like an excuse at that stage. So one of the things I always encourage um, everybody in my coaching groups to do is make that as part of, ask the client the question, right? That's another way to do it, is ask the client the question. Is there something we need to be aware of? Do you know what the perception is? Most people are honest, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing, Suki, on that point is, there's an employer brand and then there's a, company brand, right? And they have to be aware of both, right? So, for example, if you're a big name, doesn't necessarily mean you have a great employer brand, right? So that also is something to bring to the forefront, because a lot of clients will say, we are so and so, right? And we were known for so and so, and candidates are lucky if they're employed with us, which to some extent is true, but also we have to just educate them on the differences, right? And when I say educate, it's not a top-down conversation. It's a curiosity. It's sharing the information and letting them sometimes come to that conclusion on their own. But addressing it, to your point, is so crucial, especially in this market today, where it's so easy to blame the recruiter, right, for not
Yep.
having the job filled, as opposed to making it a partnership. Help us help you, right? And if you want someone in that seat, here's how I think and I suggest and I recommend we go about it. And the ball is in their court. If they play by those processes and sort of advice, and or not, and if they don't, at least you've done your job.
Actually, you make a really good point there, because if they refuse to acknowledge or address it, is that the client I know we can go down a completely different rabbit hole here, but is that the client you really want to be working with?
Correct.
Right. And then the other part of it also, I think we should just quickly add before we move on, is when you have that information, you're able to relay it to your candidate before the candidate discovers if they haven't, and you're able to handle that. So I think it kind of works both ways, but ultimately, if a company refuses to have that conversation and they're saying, oh no, we are perfect, that's an alarm bell.
Correct.
Yeah, that's an
And
alarm
a
bell.
lot of times, Suki, just one last thing on this, because
It's
it's
okay.
a very prevalent topic. Sometimes companies are aware of it and they're like, it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared, to your point, to have that honest conversation with your candidate and sharing that information without altering it to the candidate, right? And
Yep.
that's the time to sort of under promise, over deliver, right? It's not time to sugarcoat and change things, because the more the candidate's aware and can make a conscious choice to get into an environment with said reviews or with said feedback, the more prepared they are, right? And sometimes the comments could not be related to the job, but more of a organizational problem where they can live with, right? But if it's impacting their job and it's very specific to their department, then it's something they have to really think about and get back to us before moving forward.
Yeah, totally. And it almost, when you do this process, it almost, think of it as a funnel. You do all of this, put everything in, and out pops your ideal client, because at some stage you're going to look at it and say, this doesn't work for me as a recruiter. In other cases, you can say, this works for me. And once you've built that relationship, because once you've helped somebody do that change culture piece, once, twice, the company's not going to move away from you neither, because now they've got a partner that understands where they come from, they're helping them change and where they're going. But my next question kind of just leads on from there. We've talked about helping the clients attract, retain. This day and age, or current climate, it just seems to be money all the time. It is more money, more money, more money. What are some of the other ways that you've been able to help your clients attract and secure the right staff for their business without just saying, okay, well, here's another $50,000, without just throwing money at the base salary?
Yeah, I mean, that is, the time-old trick in recruitment is, sort of, there is the compensation, but then there is the non-monetary, added value that, we need to communicate to the candidate. So what we were talking about today in this market is, when a candidate we're working with, when we're working with a candidate, we make sure that the candidate can come up with reasons why they're looking for new opportunities other than compensation. And if they are not able to articulate that, that is sort of a red flag for us that it maybe not going to work, because when it comes to compensation, there's no end to it, right? There is their current company that can offer more money. There's other companies that can offer more money. There is that current offer or their current employer that we're working with that can offer more money. But regardless of that game, right? What is going to make the candidate move, right? And I think if they are able to articulate that, it's a good sign. And if they're not in this candidate market, we have to kind of put a pause and revisit this, candidate a little bit more in depth. Sometimes the reasons are things that we don't know, things that are, not shared with us. So we just have to take it with grain of salt that, maybe they're not ready to make a move, right? But if they are able to articulate reasons other than compensation, that's the first thing we do from the inception on the candidate side. The second thing is, I think the key is to filter out candidates that are only after a number, right? And ensuring that we're making the correct cultural fit, right? So, but communicating that to the candidate, right? So if we're working with a candidate, sharing with them that's what we're after, not just the compensation, because we're, measured on, retention and, our fall off ratios, and making sure that they are a mid to long term fit within that opportunity. And that is, in this market, very powerful, because the candidate realizes our motivation isn't just compensation, right? Because sometimes they may feel like, it's the only reason. And, although that is part of the business, it's not the only reason we make moves. And on the client side, I think one of the ways they can secure employees is other than compensation is the hiring manager themselves. I think, a lot of times hiring managers rely on the employer brand, right? Rely on the benefits, the perks, the discounts, the other monetary things, or the career advancement opportunities, or the learning opportunities, which are all fantastic. But I think, especially now, being a match with the hiring manager's values, with the hiring manager's, philosophy, is extremely important, right? And not necessarily they have to sell themselves, but they have to speak to their leadership style, speak to their vulnerabilities, right? Are they, treating the interview as a human to human interaction, right? Conversation, I think, is extremely important. And it's also about how they make the candidate feel in an interview, right? Because a lot of times we're hearing feedback that I don't know how to interview went, right? Because the interviewer was, very hard to read, right? Although that historically may have worked, but I think in the world we are today, and what's come to in the future, people want to see the leader, right? They want to know who they are. They want to know what their values are. They want to know if they want to march behind this leader as much as possible. So I think those are some of the ways, not all the ways, but some of the ways that, we're able to secure new employees without it being just about salaries.
So, all great points, but as you were talking, a thought crossed my mind. So, if you've got a interview and the feedback is, oh, couldn't read them, poker face, couldn't quite get a gauge on them. It happens. We hear that all the time as well. How would you suggest anybody that's currently dealing with a client like that, how would you suggest they approach that? Because unless we're
Yeah.
giving feedback to the hiring manager how they're coming across, that interview isn't going to go as smooth as it can.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is we can't change that individual, right? The only thing we can do is make them aware of the impact, right? And give them some questions that are, equip them with questions they can ask to make it seem different than what they normally do. And sometimes it's not a matter of, being direct with them and telling them that, look, the feedback we've been getting is you are a poker face, you're hard to read, that's why the candidates are not interested. But letting them know that, sharing about their hobbies maybe, or sharing about, when was the last time they had a company event, and, who was there and what was the, environment like. And I think the candidate seeing the life in that individual is sometimes does the positive effect we're looking to get. But, we have to be mindful that we are not the hiring manager, right? We are not in that position to change that individual. But we can share some questions, we can share some best practices with them, and share with them, data, right, and around candidates' interest levels as they're interviewing with motivated and engaged hiring managers as opposed to not motivated and engaged hiring managers, right? And that could be anecdotally, right, based on the past experiences we've had in placements. One thing I always share with clients is, when you are involved in the interview as much as the candidate is in selling the opportunity, we see a mid to long-term fit, right, with for that candidate, because now they've bought in not only in the company and the compensation on all the great things, but in you, right? And that I think resonates with a lot of hiring managers, and it's something that they take away, may not implement, but they definitely think about it and make small changes over time.
Well, they usually go home and ask their significant other, right? And it's like, do I come across like this? And 99% of the time, it's like, of course you do, right? So I'm just mindful of time, and I want to move on to
Sure.
a really important question. Well, I think they're all important, but I think this one, we've been talking about what's happened over the last couple of years, where we are today, but I just want to look forward at this supposed recession. And, you know, I've been in this industry way too long. I've had gone through multiple recessions, nothing quite like the pandemic, and we always come out the other end. That's I want to make sure I get that out there. But we talking of a recession, what are your views on the outlook? I mean, do you even agree with that? And what advice do you have for the audience to really help them navigate these next 6, 12 months?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, we're not economists, right? So, and here we are, making our best guess. And actually, economists also don't have a clear idea, especially in these conditions, what the future looks like. So, to sit here and say, a time frame about the recession, or how big it's going to be and the impact of it, is just, not accurate, right? But one thing that we can learn from what's happening in for example, the stock market right now is a bit of a correction that's happening, right? Where, for example, the tech sector is going through a huge correction right now, and that's because of a variety of reasons. But the reasons also may relate to the employment market as well. So during the pandemic, we saw inflated salaries. We saw inflated compensation packages. We saw bonus offerings that to retain candidates. We saw a plethora of moves happen from companies to companies. And I think the next however long it takes, we will go through some sort of a correction of that. And some people may be disgruntled by the corrections, and some people may be, take advantage of the correction. So regardless, we'll see some movements happen in that market. So we do anticipate, a downturn or a labor market correction in the near future. And, because during the pandemic, some were hiring out of desperation, and some are, paying inflated salaries during the pandemic. And some candidates also made moves solely because of compensation, are now revisiting things like cultural fit, right? And they may go through another exercise of what's out there, right? What is other opportunities out there that are better culture fit for me? And so another correction or reshuffle is imminent. If and when a downturn takes place, right? We're talking about a financial downturn now. What we have right now within the search practice is we have a playbook ready, right? That includes, key KPIs to monitor leading up to the, anticipated time frame that happens. Mix of business, what it looks like, and what it will look like probably when the downturn happens. And what is our focus in terms of functional roles, so we don't have to kind of just go out there and hope for the best, but we know there are functional roles that are essential, right, to each business, so we focus on those. And the second, they're revenue generating, or if they're not revenue generating, they're crucial and essential, right? So I think having that playbook ready in your vault, ready to go, is extremely important, but also keeping in mind the KPIs and the information that you need to look at leading up to something like this. And if you are a small firm, perhaps you look at new markets and regions you should diversify to now for when the time the pandemic happens, or the recession happens of some sort. The pandemic already happened, and go from there.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. The reality is, and I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago, when Microsoft launched, the whole business plan and everything was during the recession. And look where they are right now, right? So I think one of the things I just want to caution people on is there can be a lot of fear mongering, right? And you listen to news over here and it's this and there it's that. Stay focused on your desk. Stay focused on your business. Stay focused on your clients, because what's going to happen is even if your client's needs reduce, you still want to be the sole supplier to them. And then at the end of the day, something new will come up. It always does, right? We've just got to be prepared to not be so attached to the process we have right now. We've got to be attached to ensuring we deliver the highest value possible to two of our clients, because the candidate might not be paying, but we still got to look at them as a client, and then of course the employer. So
Correct. And on
yeah.
that note, something to kind of more practical as downturn or anything happens, is the mindset of us, right? And I think you made a great point that it's not the end of the world. There's, focus on the desk, focused on your day to day, but also remember something that, hiring may freeze, or there may be some cancellations in orders, but that does not mean your clients have to stop interviewing your candidates, right? So one thing we learned during the pandemic was that we want to get the client to continue to interview, and we find that clients that did end up interviewing during downturns or hiring freezes and things like that without expectation of making the hire, and it was very transparent on both sides that a hiring may not happen, but it's just a conversation, ended up finding top talent when the freeze was lifted, or when they had an opportunity to make that hire. So that's something to also consider, is that top talent is available 24/7, 365, regardless of what's happening in the world, right? So making your client aware that having a coffee doesn't cost them anything is a great way to get that conversation going.
Yeah, because you're pipelining, right? It's
Correct.
because it reminds me 2008 financial crisis. We had clients at that stage who were interviewing candidates from their competitors, and those candidates were making a move not because they were made redundant, but they were looking around how their employer conducted themselves with the redundancies of their colleagues, and they chose they didn't want to be part of that. Right. So there's always something happening. I think it's really important that we never lose sight of that, right? Because it's so easy to get caught up in the, oh my God, nobody's hiring. Right.
Correct.
And before you know it, your desk has come to a grinding halt. Listen, I'm really conscious of time. I just want to make sure that we leave a little bit of time to jump to questions.
Sure.
You okay to handle a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So Tony, do you see the questions there?
We'll just give people a couple of moments to submit them. Suki, I think people have been really tuned in to everything you've been sharing. I'd be interested to know whether you think this is a great or a not so great time to start a recruitment business, Sadiar. What's your take, given everything we're seeing on the horizon?
Sure. I think in terms of timing, the perfect time is now, right, for anything in business. And I think how you go about that, and what type of specialization do you do, or you don't do a specialization, or what path you take is the indicator you will be successful or not. Some of the things that are huge issues with employers are still talent shortage, right? And it will continue to be. Top talent will be hard to find for the foreseeable future. We've had record-breaking unemployment numbers, and I think we'll continue to, see that within top functions and skill sets and industries. So, to start a recruitment business, it's just a matter of It's a question of how you go about starting it. It's not a matter of starting it, because right now I think, or any time is a great time to start a business, especially within the services industries. Now, also the other thing to keep in mind is what your model looks like in terms of your operating model, right? Are you going to be hands-on or hands-off? And I think my suggestion is, the best results come when you're completely hands-on and you're there with your team and you're in the trenches with them, because they can see that, you're leading from the front. And as your business grows, it's so important not to lose that, right? Because that is, the first and foremost important thing in our industry, and something that personally I learned from the legal industry when I was recruiting in legal, is that you see partners, you see people that have been in law for many years, extremely knowledgeable, prestigious, and they're still in it, right? And they're still having cases, they're still going to trial, they're still in it, and that knowledge sharing and seeing that is extremely powerful, and one of the, I think, reasons that they're very resilient during downturns as well.
Totally
Terrific,
agree.
thank you.
Now's the time to do it. Yeah.
And other questions coming in, Suki, Sadiar, as a recruiter, what can you do to make yourself more attractive in terms of the specialized skills that you have? And are there any special training programs you'd particularly recommend?
I think, if you don't mind, Suki, I'll take this one. I think as a recruiter, your number one source of information is your candidate, right? I would say 90% of your time should be invested in interviewing great candidates, learning about their day-to-day, learning about what are their pain points, right? And I think that is your number one source of really learning about your niche and specialization. And it's a numbers game, right? As much interview as possible. I'm not going to give a KPI just for sake of KPI, but you have to aim to have quality conversations with people from that industry, right? Be curious, be a journalist, right? Sort of, so to speak, right? Learn about their pain points, learn about what companies they're interested in moving, because at the end of the day, our job is to, place them in employers that they are interested in, working in. Understand their compensation triggers, right? What is going to make them make a move? Their titles, what is their career path look like, and where is the kind of a point they become stagnant, and looking at how you can move them through that process is extremely important. What is a revenue generating seat within that niche, right? So looking at your niche in two ways. One is, even if you're in finance, right, there is definitely a seat that is revenue generating by saving money, right, from the company, and there are seats that are non-revenue generating, but it supports that. So those are the things from the candidate side. From the industry perspective, I think learning it as learning the 101s of your industry, right? The terminologies, the who is who of your industry is extremely important, and you can get a lot of that through social media, but also dedicating time, focused time to, for example, learning all the abbreviations in your industry, or learning about the biggest companies in your industry that have the biggest number of headcount that you're specializing in, and learning about candidates' profiles. Like, for example, you pull up for example, if you specialize in finance, you pull up a CFO's profile and learning about their work history, right? Where did they start? How did they move? And how is that relevant to everyone else in that industry is, I think, extremely important. But there are obviously books. You can go on Amazon and you can pull up any content you want. YouTube, great resource. Lots of content there. Those are things I can think of. Suki, on your end?
Well, it's actually a timely question, because on Wednesday, so day after tomorrow, we're actually launching a coaching program for exactly this. So that's going to be a year-long program. So I'm not sure who asked that question. So what I'll do is, when we send a recording of today's episode, I'll put the details in that. So if you want to take a look at that or jump on a call and have a conversation, feel free to. If not, I've got the free Facebook group as well, right? So join that group as well.
I'm glad you said that, Suki. I was just about to chime in and say the same. And yeah, another question come through. Fantastic information. What advice would you give to someone who's hesitating about changing their recruitment vertical?
I think, the hesitation has a lot to do with probably revenue and book of business that you're currently carrying, and the risk factors to that, or also it could be, I would say less, but, about the learning curve, right? And learning that industry. I would say the data has a lot more to do with your decision making than how you feel about it, right? I think if the data directs you towards it's a tight candidate market in that vertical as well as it is in your current one, you have the resources to learn about that vertical as much as possible. And third, how do you maneuver keeping your book of business and adding a new book of business to it? What does your succession planning look like, right? Is it you that ventures into that new vertical, or do you hire someone else to venture through that vertical? And if it's the latter, you have to be very clear about the profile. How much training are you able to give them realistically, and how much training they have to do on their own, right? But diversifying your portfolio is I'm a big fan of that, and learning about verticals that you can tap into that are cordial to the one that you currently have, right? So for example, if you are in completely one side of the spectrum, you don't want to open a vertical that's completely on the opposite side of the spectrum. Some of the nuances might be different, some of the speeds might be different. From a KPI perspective, they're completely different. The number of ratios you need for one vertical are very different than the other in terms of placement ratios. So those are things you have to look at the data and make that decision from there. But I'm all for diversifying and starting now.
What I would also add to that is, if you're looking to replace, completely move out of one vertical into another, understand why. Why are you leaving that vertical? Is it you don't like the vertical, so you're not interested in the skill set and things like that? Or are you leaving because technology's booming, accounting and finance is booming, whatever that might be, and you're thinking that's going to be an easier vertical to launch? I don't know who asked that question, so I'm just going to keep this very general. But if you're leaving because you can't make it work and you're not generating the money and you don't deal with the real issue, there's a danger you take the same process into a new vertical and you get the same result. So one of the things I would say is sit down and really ask yourself, why am I really looking to move out of this industry, this particular vertical?
Thank you both. And another one just come in. Curious about your take on the talent pool becoming global now that a lot of functions, especially IT, are able to be offshored or to recruit from remote workers overseas. Any views on the impact that's all been having?
I think, for example, IT or creative or design, we'll eventually see a lot of that, right? We'll see a lot more openness to a global, workforce, and really are truly getting candidates from all over the world, as long as they can speak the language and there's no barriers on that front. There are some areas that I think will take more time in order to become like that. And there will be some that are not possible to become global as much as others. So for example, within IT, one of the trends that we're seeing is that some of the skill sets are not just being offshored, but completely being handled in a different country or being handled in a different continent altogether. And there are obviously pros and cons to that, but the pro to that is, from a recruitment standpoint, you can now have access to global talent, right? And that global talent is now, comes at a different cost, right? Sometimes lower than where the main employer is, but also is able to service different time zones and have different types of work ethics than, for example, that the client is used to in that market. So what I would say is, it has a lot to do with how employers perceive the topic. If they are open to it, then it's a great opportunity, give an example and, go from there. But if they're not open to it, it's about, educating them and sharing best practices with them on that front. And I think the hesitation for most employers is, how do we manage a global workforce, right? And that's a topic that, you just have to maneuver and, start small and pilot and go from there, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think also there's a danger. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Dallas and I actually had dinner with a company that does VAs, international virtual assistants, across a number of different industries. And one of the things we were talking about is a lot of companies think, okay, it's cheaper for me. No, I'm just making some numbers up here. So I've got to pay $20 an hour here for this person. I'm going to get somebody offshore and I'm going to $10 for an hour per hour. But they don't actually sit down and think about, well, how are we going to really truly onboard this person so they understand our lingo, our processes and things like that. So one of the rubs that's this individual is telling me that he sees companies have is they just expect that person to know it. Right, as if they had somebody sitting in the office, but it's a completely different communication style. So that's one thing I would say, just be very mindful of that, is how you're communicating with this. I recently hired a VA. She's in the Philippines and it's working out really well, but there was stuff that I just thought was so obvious that I didn't need to put it in the process, and then I realized, yes, I do. So it took a little bit of I think it took me a week to realize that. But that's the advice I would get. If you're going to go on the offshore model, you really got to make sure those systems are solid, and you may think it's basic and obvious. It's not. Put it in the process.
Excellent. Well, I'm conscious of time, Suki. It's been a really fantastic session, and we'll look forward to getting the recording out to everyone. I don't know if you would just want to say a couple of words to wrap things up and what people can expect next.
Yeah, so from my perspective, next guest will be arriving. What month are we in? We're in June now, right? So it'll be July. So 4 weeks from now. So I'll be announcing that any day now. So make sure you sign up. Other than that, as I mentioned, I've got the new program launching. So that's all happening. And really, the industry's booming. So let's all go and make money now whilst it's booming. Sadiar, any final thoughts? And of course, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
No, thank you very much, Suki. Thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone on the call to attend. Appreciate you taking time out of your day, and hopefully you found the session helpful. And I'm open to networking with anybody on this call, and jumping on a Teams call or any type of networking. Really looking forward to it. And any other issues, problems you have, go to Suki. She knows it all.
Thank you for that. Guys, thank you ever so much. And I will get this recording out along with those details in the next day or two. But if you have any questions, just reach out. Else I'll see you all next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.